Okay, so today we are going to talk about South Korea.
South Korea? You mean K-drama?
K-pop. Hit you with that
Or do you mean K-beauty? K-food? 진짜? 맛있어!
No, we are going to talk about how to do business in South Korea.
Hi! Let's get started about the South Korea country. This nation, South Korea, officially known as the Republic of Korea, a country in Eastern Asia that occupies the southern part of the Korean Peninsula. The country also shares maritime border with China and Japan. Seoul is the largest city and capital, and Busan is the second city and main part of the South Korea. Korean is their official language. South Korea population is extremely homogeneous. Almost the entire population is ethnically Korean, and a small number of permanent ethnic Chinese residents remain. The Korean language, also known as one of the ethnic languages, is spoken by all Koreans, and affinities with Japanese, and include many Chinese loanwords. In South Korea, freedom of religion is legally guaranteed, and no national religion exists. There is still no uniformity in religious practice, a condition that outside observers sometimes find confusing. Resources in Korea. South Korean mineral resources are merged. Anthracite coal, iron ore, graphite gold, silver, tungsten, lead and zinc are the most important deposits, which is together make up about 2/3 of overall value of mineral resources. In South Korea, livestock production is one of the country's dynamic agriculture activities. Consumption of livestock products such as milk and meat also grew dramatically as the country witnesses rapid economic growth rate. In South Korea, most of the forest cover has remained relatively unchanged. There has been active reforestation in areas where forests were cleared since as early as the 1970s. Within its border, South Korea has relatively few mineral resources, and the country's most significant mineral reserves include graphite, iron ore, coal, silver, gold, zinc, lead, and tungsten. All these minerals make up approximately 2/3 of country's total value of mineral resources. That's all from me. I will pass to the next presenter.
Thank you. Now let's look at the legal and political in South Korea. First, how is the political system in South Korea? The Constitution of the Republic of Korea calls for a liberal democratic political system. Its principles are based on the sovereignty of the people, with all the authority of state emanating from its citizens, namely separations of powers among the three branches of government, the rule of law, and the responsibility to promote citizens' welfare, as well as the attainment of peaceful unification of Korea. South Korea has a civil law legal system as the laws were influenced largely by the European civil law system. However, the US law has influenced more recent legislations. South Korea does not recognize a federal legal system. The South Korean government has imposed heavy restrictions on doing business with North Korea under the National Security Act. In addition, there were restrictions on engaging in financial transactions with Iran under the Foreign Exchange Transactions Act. Move on to the legal of business in South Korea. Under the Commercial Code, the main business vehicles in South Korea are Partnership Company, Habja Johab, Limited Partnership Company, Habja Hoisa, Stock Company, Jusi Hoisa, Limited Company, Yuhan Hoisa, Joint Venture, Branch, and License Office. Meanwhile, sole proprietorship is not a legal form of entity in South Korea. That is all about legal and political in South Korea. I will pass to the next presenter, Nurul Chuhada.
Okay, thank you, Shazila. So next, I'm going to talk about business culture in South Korea. There are various aspects in business culture. Firstly is age and status. In South Korea, high-ranking individuals tend to have more power than their subordinates. Since Koreans are very concerned and respect about the status of a person in the organization, the decision-making process will be based on the senior approval, but with the help of input from their subordinates. Secondly is business card. In South Korea, business cards should be given politely using both hands while the businessman is still standing and receive one in return. Once they have received the business card, they cannot just put the card in their pocket, but instead they need to take a few seconds to review the names and titles. Thirdly is gift giving. In South Korea, the gift must be given with both hands, and it is a Korean custom to refuse a gift for several times before accepting it. Okay, next, the gift must be wrapped nicely in red or yellow paper because this color represents royal colors. Or you could also use colors that represent happiness, for example, pink colors. And also, the businesses should never sign a card in red ink as well as using green, white or black wrapping paper because it represents death and bad luck. Next is greetings and handshakes. Koreans greet each other by bowing and shaking hands, but they have a specific bowing for the specific people. For instance, the person that initiates the bow should bending from the waist to an angle of a 15 degree when meeting someone of the same age. Meanwhile, an angle between 30 to 45 degree bow is preferred when meeting someone new or in a high ranking. Lastly is dining. When at the dinner table, everyone has to wait until the host invites them to dinner. And while eating, it is not good to leave the chopsticks sticking into the rice bowl, but instead, everyone must place them by the side of their place setting on the chopstick rest when not in use. Okay, that's all from me. I'll pass to the next presenter, Adeline.
South Korea is one of the planet's most densely populated countries, with a density of 503 people per square kilometer or 1,302 people per square mile. Nearly 70% of South Korea land is uninhabitable due to its mountainous, and the population is established in lowland area, contributing to density that is higher than average. As for 2020, the population of South Korea is at 51.3 million people.
The largest cities, according to statistics taken in 1995, were Busan, Seoul, Daegu, Gwangju, Incheon, and Daejeon. In South Korea, approximately 72.19% of the population was between 15 and 64 years old in 2019, while those above the age of 64 made up around 15%. The youngest generation made up an even smaller percentage than the elderly, but were the only group that did not increase in size over the last decade, partly due to a decrease in birth since 2007. There are two possible factors that lead to demographic changes: a low birth rate and an aging population. Over the years, Korean life expectancy has increased from less than 80 years to almost 83 years, but the birth rate has dropped to the lowest rate of one birth per woman. Despite the government spending billions of dollars to raise birth rates, it did not achieve the desired.
Higher education is an overwhelmingly serious issue in South Korean society, where it is viewed as one of the fundamental cornerstones of South Korean life. Education is regarded as a high priority for South Korean families, as success in education is important for improving one's socio-economic position in South Korean society.
Thank you to Adeline Sakina. Let's move on to the main and other industry in South Korea. South Korea relies largely upon export to fuel the growth of its economy, with finished products such as electronic, textile, ship, automobile, and steel. Firstly, shipbuilding is one of the main industries found in South Korea. During the 1970s and 1980s, South Korea became a leading producer of ships, including oil supertankers and oil drilling platforms. Secondly, electronic. During the 1980s through the 2000s, South Korea companies such as Samsung, LG, and SK have led South Korea growth in electronic. Thirdly, the automobile industry. By the late 1980s, the capacity of the South Korean motor industry had increased more than fivefold since 1984. Next, mining industry. Most of the mineral deposits in the Korean peninsula are located in North Korea, with the south only possessing an abundance of tungsten and graphite. In addition, construction has been an important South Korea export industry since the early 1960s and remain a critical source of foreign currency and invisible export earnings.
Furthermore, the armament industry. Korea's remarkable technological advancement and industrialization allowed Korea to produce increasingly advanced military equipment. During the 1960s, South Korea was largely dependent on the United States to supply its armed force. But after the elaboration of President Richard M. Nixon's policy of Vietnam, South Korea began to manufacture many of its own weapons. Lastly, tourism industry. In 2012, 11.1 million foreign tourists visited South Korea, making it the 20th most visited country in the world. Recently, the number of tourists have grown dramatically due to the increased popularity of the Korean wave. It is also known as Hallyu.
So that's all from us. Thank you.